Hi, welcome back to another episode of the chill film discussion. Yeah, this week's episode we're gonna discuss a movie that we've actually seen a previous adaptation for.
Yeah.
Um, Murder on the Orient Express, the 2017 edition of this film. I think the first Murder on the Orient Express that was 1960s,
76?
was it?
1974.
1974. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this one is 2017, so it is a more of a modern adaptation
Yeah.
of the same story, written by Agatha Christie of the murder mystery that happens on the Orient Express train.
Hmm.
This film has an ensemble cast
Oh,
of
yeah.
actors,
Big cast.
big cast,
Big names, too.
big names too. Yeah, we got Kenneth Branagh, who, if you don't know, plays Gilderoy Lockhart in the Harry Potter Chamber of Secrets, but he also directed Thor, so you know he's been in a lot. Johnny Depp plays Mr. Ratchet. Penelope Cruz plays the nurse. I never really understand. I always forget her name, but she plays the nurse. Um, yeah. Let's see who else. Oh yeah, Daisy Ridley. Star Wars.
Yeah.
She was the governess. Michelle Pfeiffer, who I conveniently forgot in the beginning of the stream. But yes, she plays Linda Arden. She's in Ant-Man,
Hmm.
which we just reviewed. Um, and oh yeah, Josh Gad, voice of Olaf,
Yeah.
is in this film. Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin, then also in this film. I just love how I'm just like listing all these actors. Like, all right, this is how I know them from.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, big ensemble cast. But despite the ensemble cast, like, I don't think any of the acting really stood out to me.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that partially is due to the fact that none of the actors had like maybe as much screen time as they could have,
Right.
and that is probably at least compared to what we saw in the first adaptation, the older adaptation of this
Yeah.
film. Despite it being shorter in actual screen time, it felt there are parts where I felt longer, and I think that is probably attributed to the fact that like there was a lot more screen time for Perot, who is played by Branagh.
Hmm.
Um, he's like of course, the main character. He's the detective. We follow him throughout the entire movie, but there was this whole intro sequence that wasn't present in the older film. And you can't really tell. We're going to make a lot of comparisons between this film and the older film. Uh, yeah, there was a huge introduction sequence, which I think serves the purpose of, understanding his character. But at the same
Right.
time, because there was so much time focused on him, there was less time focused on the other 12 characters that were important to this film.
Right.
Um, so yeah. I mean, his acting was good. Like, it definitely wasn't like, I mean, it stood out. It was peculiar, but that's his character.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so there was definitely nothing wrong with that. It was good acting, but at the same time, considering his ensemble cast of very talented actors, it just none of it really at least stood out to me.
Right.
Not to say it was bad. It's just you might expect more from such a talented cast,
Hmm.
but um, otherwise, yeah, essentially, this story had a lot more um action sequences that I noticed. There were, I think, to sort of make it a little bit more fast-paced, fit the palette of the modern era of film.
Hmm.
Um, and because there were shorter sequences with the interrogations of the characters in this film, it just felt like mm, there wasn't as much time to digest new information. Like it was just like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, like it sort of fit like a shorter attention span
Yeah.
almost. And despite in the previous film, a lot of the characters kind of had like around the same screen time. It felt like they were all equally important. In this film, there's definitely a tier list
Hmm.
of importance at least in how I perceived it. Some characters got a lot more screen time than others. Um, on from
Right.
from
Right.
from the characters involved with the murder. But yeah, uh, and I don't necessarily think that was done as well. I think that like in the previous film, what I enjoyed was the fact that like each character had their own, like it was fleshed out. Like
Yeah.
we had like a lengthy interrogation, a flashback associated with them. Like it sort of like all fit together. In this film, the pieces were a little bit more uneven.
Right.
I guess I would
Hmm.
say, just to put it shortly. And yeah, I think there were also some dramatic sequences. Like the climax of this film was a little over the top. Especially if you see them all, like they all exited the train, they're all standing at one table, they're like blocking the train, like as if like, oh, we can't pass until we figure out the mystery. And they're like, it's like, you made a comparison to like,
Yeah.
it's like it looks like Jesus' Last Supper, and then this are playing. But yeah, I think throughout this film, like it was, I don't know if I cut out for a bit.
A little
Hopefully I
bit.
didn't. Ah, fortunate. But anyway, the climax of this film was a little over the top. It was, I feel like, kind of forced some drama into it when it didn't need to have that drama.
Hmm.
Um, the uh, the reveal of like who perpetrated the murder
Right.
was enough, I think, as like just to as much was all that was needed for the climax. They didn't need the whole like going outside, sitting at the lawn table, having the gun. You know,
Yeah.
it was. I mean, it was there was some flair to it, but I don't think it was added.
Hmm.
Um, but I do want to highlight there were some cool shots of this film. The some of the shots of the characters in the train from outside
Yeah.
as it was moving was really cool. I thought that was kind of cool to see like the scope, the scale of like, oh yeah, they're all this is their world for the next 3 days as they're
Hmm.
trapped. Um, and yeah, there was some interesting overhead shots that I guess um was just unique. It stood out, and I think you know maybe there could have been more with those types of shots.
Right.
More amusing things like could occur, but uh, for the most part, yeah, I think this film it's hard to like. We're both biased since we watched the first one, but
Right.
I do think that it tells the same story in a different way, but because of like the genre of the murder mystery, I think that the previous film, the older adaptation, did a better job.
Hmm.
It was better executed for the story that it tells.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's all I have for my remarks.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, it's very similar, Patrick. I think this film
Sure.
doesn't have the same charm as the older adaptation. As you said, the older adaptation, we get to take the time to interview each of the characters, right? And we get to spend more time with them. We get to know their stories more, right? Whereas here,
Mhm.
it's more for a modern day audience, quicker attention span, so it kind of passes by quickly, and Poirot kind of reveals a lot of information and tells the audience like what's happening, who's who, whereas it's kind of more slowly revealed in the older adaptation. So I think it's more appreciated in
Mhm.
that way because here it just maybe feels too fast and it doesn't make as much sense because of that, right? Um,
Yeah.
in the first film, in this film, as you said, we have an introduction, which is very different because I remember in the first in the older adaptation, I liked how they introduced the movie with being on the platform, different cultures. It was a busy, and they get right into it. Here, they kind of take some time, as you said, to explain, which may or may not be needed because you could have explained the character throughout the film itself. Um, but here, I think they could have, you know, again, I think the preference would have been to have more time in him trying to figure out the mystery instead of him kind of like immediately guessing like who it is, who's who. I would have definitely appreciated more time baking and seeing each character and how they're tied into the role, because a lot of roles were focused on in the previous adaptation. We're not focused on here. We didn't get to see their connections as much, and I think this kind of suffers in the end, where we were able to become more sympathetic to their plight in their first adaptation. You kind of there's this moral ambiguity of whether or not they should be turned in. Right here, while it's still present, it doesn't feel as sympathetic, right? Because again, we didn't get to relate to these characters, who they are, what they're feeling, and what their relationship is with Cassetti. Like what is their problem with Cassetti, and why come they want to exact vengeance upon him. We see that in I think better in the first adaptation than here. And then there's here Poirot is a lot more passionate, I believe. Like he's saying, yeah, you have to shoot me if you don't want me to tell, and which kind of shows his philosophy, right, of how he kind of thinks of it. And whereas in the other adaptation, he's still at first feel strongly that he should turn them in, but he's more solemn about it, right? Here he's not as solemn. He's more angry, like, yeah, the world is ugly and I will have to fix it, and you guys all should be you have to kill me first. In the first one he's like, yeah, I should do it, I want to do it, but then he kind of doesn't do it, right? Because he feels like, yeah, maybe there's another form of justice to be had here. Again, a little bit more ambiguous on how things turn out. So I just think in terms of character development and growth, this movie doesn't really do it too well, right? Because it quickly glances over, and we focus on other characters. I mean, Poirot here is the main focus, but also you have certain characters who are focused, right? Who we should focus on, but not give enough time, or characters who don't even really see too much, and it's a very quick glance. Which is unfortunate because everyone plays a part. As I think we stated before in the first film, it felt more like an episodic series of each one, but it doesn't feel tiring. Here, we go from one interrogation to the next, and we don't get too much information except for the stuff that Poirot feeds us. So I think the story-wise, general story-wise, it's pretty similar. It's a good story, right? It's a mystery. You can't really not enjoy those, like whodunits. But I just think the execution was just not done as well as I think the first time it came around. And I get it, right? They want to make their own film here, right? They want to make their own differences than they had in the first film. But I just think we kind of suffer from character development because of that.
For sure. I think we are kind of in the same boat, and I think our ratings are going to be very similar.
Yeah.
Because of that. So yeah, I think for my rating, I would probably give this a 7. Because I mean, it's a decent film. It tells a good story, but like at the same time, I think if you want to watch a better film, you just watch the older one. Like this is the time when, like, I would just recommend the older one over the newer
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. No,
Um,
agreed.
and at the same time, it's like, but as a story itself, like, let's say you're not privy to old films.
Yeah.
I think the story is still a good story, and you know, if you decide to watch it because it's the newer version, for the sake of newer, then yeah, I would still recommend this film because the story itself is a very solid story, and I think
Okay.
anyone who enjoys murder mysteries will enjoy this one. But that being said, the older one is better. Yeah, so
Yeah.
so I give it a 7.
Okay. I give it a 6. I think.
I got a little bit of difference. All right.
Yeah, I, mean, I think it is I feel like it's an average film, just a little bit above average because again, as you said, story is good, good mystery novel based on um, uh, you know, the first film that we've seen before, right? It's nothing to Agatha Christie, she writes good mystery stories to follow along. So
Yeah.
I enjoy the plot. Having there, I just think the execution could have been done better. I think the characters. I definitely wanted to have more character development and character focus. Even though it's a large cast, right? We have 12 characters here, um, or 12 different suspects. The first adaptation does a good job of going into here, and here it does not. And again, I think that the film suffers for it because we don't become as sympathetic, or it doesn't seem as enjoyable. It doesn't really hook me in. The storyline as I've seen it before. Before we have seen flashbacks, here it's very limited. So I'm not too engaged with the story. Again, this probably might be because I'm biased and saw the first film, and like that I think a lot better than this one. And
Mhm.
just a different way to put it. But I think this film, just its execution wise, even though it has a good story, the way it handles its characters, probably was not as ideal. But it's not like a terrible film at all. So I would I recommend it? Maybe, but I don't know. I think if you're, I guess want to watch like a mystery film, right? I mean, this could work, but I just think it's not as as good as, again, the first one, and probably as just like you, Patrick, recommend the first one. Not the first one, the older adaptation than this one.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Cool. Well, pretty similar ratings. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, that concludes this discussion, this review. So we will be back next week.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Sounds good. Cool. And we'll be back with another film that we
Yeah.
will decide off
Okay.
stream. So until
Bye.
next time, goodbye.